Good morning and Shabbat Shalom. This is Valley Beth Shalom Torah study for a Shabbos morning, and I am delighted to welcome you. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, joined this morning by my dear friends and teachers and co-conspirators, Rabbi Sherry Hirsch of the Blurry American Jewish University, and Rabbi Mark Gelman of the vivid Southern Florida community, and we're so glad you're here this morning. So this morning in the Torah, we are finishing the book of Exodus. It is a double parsha, Vayakhel Pekudei. It is the parsha that makes real all of the instructions that were given some weeks ago in Truma Titzaveh. God has shown Moses how to build the shrine, how to build the Mishkan, how to build all of its furnishings and accoutrements, how to create the vestments of the priests. And God has assigned to him a man named Bezalel, who is given divine wisdom, divine skill to put all of this together. And they have collected all of the contributions of the people Israel in order to make this happen. And in these two Torah portions, every single one of the things that God has commanded Moses to build, he builds. And at the very end of the Torah portion, he's going to turn it on. He's going to launch it. And the presence of the divine enters this, and we have the very first functioning religious institution in the Jewish faith. It is the Mishkan. It is a place to come and to meet God. Literally, Ohel Moed, the meeting place where one meets divinity. And there's a whole now ritual that will go around this, which is coming in the weeks to come. That's what's coming in Sefer Vayikra. In the book of Leviticus, all the instructions of the various rites and sacrifices and rituals that will be carried on here in the Mishkan. Now, as we look at this, we're confronted with a very different kind of religion than what we are used to. We're used to a religion of prayer, of verbal prayer. We're used to a religion of religious acts like mitzvot. We're used to holidays and special festivals and celebrations. And what's listed in the Torah is something very different, something called korbanot, sacrifices. We're going to hear a lot about this when we get into the book of Leviticus, because the rules of sacrifice are exquisitely articulated. They're very, very specific of which animals, under which circumstances, and how they're to be offered. But as we look at the whole matter of sacrifice, when you want to confront the divine, when you want to commune with the divine, when you want to share a word of thanks, or you want to ask for something, you bring something, you bring an animal, you bring foodstuffs, you bring a sacrifice. This is a very different kind of worship. Rabbi Gelman, talk to me about sacrifice. How does this work?
Well, it starts with Cain and Abel, and it starts with a differentiation of sacrifices that is made by God in accepting the sacrifice of Abel, and Cain kills Abel because he's jealous. And it continues on into what we call the priestly cultus, which meant this entire enterprise of people bringing animals to the priest after 621, when Josiah centralized worship in Jerusalem. It was only Jerusalem. Before that, it was in various temples throughout the country. And these animals and this grain and incense and all of it was offered to support the priests and to support Judaism. Being Jewish, let me say this simply, was to engage in acts of animal sacrifice. I mean, it was other things, but there's really no prayers. There aren't really any prayers in the Torah. El Now Rafana Allah, where Moses prays to heal Miriam. That may be the only prayer in the Torah. We're not even sure if that's a prayer. But anyway, they don't have Shacharit, Mincha, Mariv, all of that. All of that was introduced by the rabbis when the temple was destroyed, and they replaced a prayer for a sacrifice. The morning offering was replaced by the morning prayer. And my strong feeling is that when we gave up, because it was destroyed, so it was easy to give it up, when we gave up biblical Judaism and replaced it with rabbinic Judaism, when we also gave up sacrificial Judaism, and replaced it with intellectual Judaism. And I think, although we gained many good things by sacrificing, by getting rid of that old world, the inherited priesthood was an abomination. The killing of animals to please God is an abomination in my view. And when we got rid of that, all of that went away, and that's good. But what we lost, and no one really speaks about this, there's 100 commentators and modern Jewish thinkers who say how lucky we are that we don't have biblical Judaism anymore, and we don't have sacrifices of animals anymore. Yes, but we lost something huge. We lost the simple idea from the first children, from Cain and Abel to now, that if you love God, if you love Judaism, the way you show it is you bring something of value to the enterprise of Judaism, to the faith of Judaism, to the religion of Judaism, or if you could say, to the peoplehood of Judaism. And that, I believe, is a critical necessity in the future of modern Judaism, restoring a sense of sacrifice. And that's my take on what we gained and what we lost.
Sherry, have we lost an ethic of sacrifice? And I want to ask you specifically because you're living in a house with 5 children. So I think you know more about sacrifice than anybody. Have we really lost an ethic of sacrifice, and what have we lost?
I'm not sure if it's a general that we've lost an ethic of sacrifice. Of course, the way that Mark described it, we've lost a culture of sacrifice, but the everyday is filled with a number of sacrifices where you give of something that is of tremendous value to someone else. Now, I can tell you in my house with dogs and people and all kinds of things, like you have to give up space, you have to give up time, you have to give up money. I mean, it goes on and on and on. But I don't know if what I would say, and Mark, I think you really touched upon this, is I think people are surprised how much sacrifice is involved in their lives to live a life of meaning. So, parenting involves a lot of sacrifices, and people are often surprised by it. They're like, I have to get up in the middle of the night and do this. I have to pick up my kid at this. It's going to interrupt my time at the gym. I think there's a level to which we are in a culture that is surprised by the level of sacrifice that's required to have the output of a meaningful life.
Yeah, let me just say in response to that, because living in Florida deprives you of certain things, but also benefits you in many, many other things. And one of the benefits is I've had many conversations with elderly retired Jews, and their stories about how little, it isn't everyone, of course, and many, just yesterday, we were visiting with wonderful children from my synagogue who came down to see their mother, and who lives near us. And it was a beautiful act of sacrifice on their part. But the people I speak to who know I'm a rabbi and we engage in these conversations say, in the old days in Brooklyn, we lived with one family. The grandparents lived with us in the same flat and we all took care of each other. Now they push you off into a nursing home or a assisted living, but you aren't being assisted by your children. You're being assisted by whoever they hire to assist you. And they were griping about that and about how lonely they feel. And so, yes, parenting does require sacrifice, but it doesn't always provoke sacrifice. And the reason for that is we live in a culture of intense individualism, in which sacrifice seems to be a choice. Just like being faithful in marriage seems to be a choice and not a duty. Just like all the other sacrifices which are called upon in our daily life, and you described very well, Sherry. Those are increasingly seen as intrusive and unnecessary. I'm sad to say.
I think the rule is, I think Sherry's pointing to a rule, which is very important, which is that meaning always involves sacrifice. That the acquisition of a sense of purpose is always a matter of giving up something of the self. So a physical sacrifice that Mark's talking about, you bring a cow to the priest, you're giving up some serious material wealth there.
Yeah.
But there are other forms of sacrifice, giving up time, giving up personal freedom, sacrificing elements of relationships and elements of comfort in order to in order to serve a higher goal. It's about pushing beyond the limits of self, transcending the boundaries of self. One of the best examples of this is very clear in front of us. In 1973, the United States Armed Forces gave up conscription and adopted a volunteer basis for conscripting people into the military. Volunteer army, remember? And
yeah,
that's
it was
why
too late for me, but yeah.
But that's why you see on television all these ads for Army and Navy, you know, be the best that you can be and join the Navy or the Air Force and gain skills and see the world. Of the 5 military branches, right? Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard. Which do you think has the most success in recruiting young people to its ranks? And the answer is the Marine Corps.
That's what I was going to guess. Because
Which
they
is
ask the most.
Which they ask the most, which is the most demanding. It impinges on your personal, I mean, all of them impinge on your personal freedom. That's why it's called service. That's why you enter the service. But the Marine Corps, of course, is the most demanding of one's personal freedom. And yet young people have an intuition that I want to be part of something which will give me that sense of purpose. I want to be part of a small group of people who are helping each other accomplish something bigger than ourselves. And the converse, of course, one of the interesting converses of this is this journalist Younger who studied guys coming back from Afghanistan and found that there was so much PTSD among soldiers returning from war in Afghanistan, even though they hadn't been in battle. Not all of them had been in actual combat. But the idea of breaking away from that small group of people who were bound together with each other, giving up so much that is personal in order to care for each other and accomplish bigger goals, coming back to the individualism of America where you're on your own. You have a lot more freedom. You do whatever you want. No one sounds reveille at 4:30 in the morning. They lost it. There was a profound mental detriment. They had a very hard time re-entering society because there isn't this sense of giving up something valuable to achieve something very powerful, very, very important. I think there's an intuition of this ethic, Mark, in the culture. Now, sadly, yeah, go ahead.
And you know, it's an easy argument to make that Jewish life is more vibrant in Israel than in the diaspora. I make that argument all the time. And people ask, well, why is that? Why should it be? Well, it's a Jewish state, obviously. But I don't think that's the answer. The answer is army service. Military service in Tzahal changes the culture because it requires a sacrifice of every Israeli kid. That could be even the sacrifice of their life. And that changes them. It matures them. It deepens them. And you can see that. People say it all the time. You know, they go on Israel trips with me and with others. They come back and say, you know, these Israelis that we met, they're just so much more mature than our kids of the same age. And I said, yeah, because they've learned how to shoot a gun and they put their lives on the line. They potentially sacrifice their lives for the greater good of the state of Israel. And when I think that's a perfect example in America, when they went to volunteer service, how they had to advertise for all of this. And it's another thing in our own profession. I just saw a factoid last week that touches on this. I mean, most of the people who entered rabbinical school with me were doing it sacrificially. They could all have done other stuff, made more money doing other things. I certainly could have made money getting guilty people out of jail. I could have done that. But a lot of them went into the rabbinate for sacrificial reasons, to do something noble, to do something helpful to the Jewish people and holy. And well, now, guess what? How many people do you think are studying for the rabbinate in all of the non-Orthodox seminaries put together? 70. That's the total number. 70. The number is plummeting. And, they said, what are the reasons? Well, it's a hard job. You have to deal with the board of trustees, and you have 500 bosses, and all the stuff you and we all know from doing it in our life. But I don't think that's it. I think the culture is different. I think it's the culture of sacrifice is not supported by the general culture, and the culture of individualism is. And I think that's killing us. And this parsha and its description of the altar and the sacrificial altar, the Mizbeach Torah, the altar of the spices, and the Mizbeach Haolah, the sacrifice, the altar of burning animals. These altars were the centerpiece of Judaism. We can't even say to people, come be a member of our synagogue and pay what you want. Because synagogues that have tried to do that find that, yeah, people come and they pay very little. Now, Sherry has a story we talked about that's very inspiring on that level of people actually doing a great job of that. But when I would visit Tommy's church and they would pass the basket, I of course asked myself, and Tommy asked me, could you do this? Could you sustain your synagogue passing a basket? And the answer is clearly no. So I'm despairing about the idea of sacrifice, because I think you beautifully said what we need sacrifice for, Eddie. We need it for meaning. We need it for being a part of something bigger than ourselves. We need it for developing the idea that what we own is not what we own at all, but just what has been loaned to us by God. It's a gift, and we need to return that gift to the world and to others. I wish it were better than it is. That's all I can say.
Well, I think what you pointed to, Mark, is important. That the ritual life that is described by the Bible here provides a moral language for something that is much deeper in life than simply sacrifices. It's this whole question of when do you give up the self, and what are the boundaries of the self, and how does one gain a sense of purpose? That one gains a sense of purpose only by transcending the boundaries of the self, only by giving up something, and what you get back is so much more valuable in that domain. And the ritual simply is a language for that. But it's surrounded, and here you made a good point as well, it's surrounded by a context in which a culture sees itself as engaged in something bigger. It's not just that Israeli kids go to the army. The whole Israeli society is infused with a sense of purpose, right? This is the culmination of a moment in Jewish history, and we're fighting for its prosperity. We're fighting for its fulfillment. And that's all of Israel has a sense of meaning, because you don't just get it from the kid in the army, although I've had wonderful experiences talking to those young people. You get it from the guy at the supermarket. You get it from the guy on the bus. You get it from everyone. They're engaged in a national project. America, at certain points in our history, had a similar idea that we were engaged in a national project that was bigger than all of us, and we were prepared to make sacrifices for that national project, sacrifices of wealth and personal freedom and comfort in order to achieve these bigger goals. And I think that's what we've really lost here. We've lost not only the ethic of sacrifice, but we've lost the national sense of collective purpose. Sherry.
You both are so sort of like the demise, but I actually think it's different. I think there was a movement in America to be very individualistic. And I think what we're seeing from young people now in their 20s is they don't know how to balance their individualism with their feelings of responsibility because they want to be engaged. They want to have a sense of purpose. They want to have a feeling of sense of being obligated. And I think that's why you see young people not saying, like, I just want to hand over my money and walk away when they're donating. They want to be part of it. And I think what's happening now is we're going full circle to, I know that serving gives me purpose. How do I balance that with my individualism? And what's the percentages of time I spend doing it is more what they're wrestling with. So I don't look at it as despairingly as you do.
Okay, well, let's turn positive for a moment. This week marks the year anniversary of the beginning of the pandemic as a national emergency. And in a few days next week, we're going to mark the year anniversary when LA County, where we live and Mark used to live, shut down. And when we've been online, doing this online instead of in shul. And so we've experienced something this last week. We really ought to say a bracha, of what we've experienced. First of all, we ought to stop and say Male for all of the people we've lost, the moments that have been lost, the occasions that have been lost, the weddings that weren't what they should have been, the birthdays that weren't celebrated, the relationships that never got consummated properly, the poor people who were stuck alone in various venues. And so there's a loss, there's a grieving, but there's also been a revelation. We've learned something. In some cases, we've learned the worst of what Mark has pointed to, those people who refuse to wear a mask and breathe on each other because they don't want to be put upon by this. That's the worst of that ethic. But there have been so many better examples of folks who realize that this calls upon me to do something selfless, to give up something of the self in order to accomplish the larger goal of collective well-being and collective health. So before we finish today, I think we should take up Mark's challenge of the ethic of sacrifice and what it gives us. And let's talk about where we've seen that in these days of the pandemic. You got a pandemic hero? Anyone got Mark, you got a pandemic hero?
Oh, yeah, I do. My pandemic hero are parents and children who have learned to live through this pandemic by sacrificing. Parents who have sacrificed unbelievable amounts of time and money and everything, just their normal life, in order to do their jobs and also take care of their kids who are home and not in school, and who didn't complain about it, and who made the best of it, and who tried to give their kids a sense of joy and purpose and meaning during this difficult and dark time. I praise the moms and dads who truly sacrifice. Truly, parenting is always a sacrifice, but COVID brought out the very best in the parents I know who have refused to let their children sink into the depths of despair. And for the children, I want the children to know how proud we are of them, that they were willing at a young age, when they didn't even understand, some of them, the young ones, what it is that they were going through. They just knew they couldn't see their friends. They couldn't have play dates anymore. They couldn't do what they wanted to do just to live as kids. And yet they knew that somehow they had to adjust to that, and that they did. As children, they did. I mean, I am so proud of them. I'm proud of the sacrifices that they made. And I believe that that is the enduring legacy of this pandemic. That will be, that it is our World War II. It is our Israeli service to Tzahal. I think it will change America, because what it did is it gave us a sense of the importance of sacrifice. And I believe it will change families, and those families, I think it has changed families, and those changed families will change our country and our world.
Thank you, Mark. That was beautiful. Sherry, you got a pandemic hero?
Yeah, I have many pandemic heroes, but I'll start with the one closest to home, which is my husband, because he's a physician and every day he went into work, except for maybe a couple weeks when he was ill. He went to work every day. And as a person at high risk for personal reasons, he still showed up every day and he showed up for every one of his patients. And many of them had COVID and many of them. And so I think he's an example of all the first responders that showed up for work every day. A lot of people didn't go to work. A lot of people lost their jobs and a lot of people had to show up every day. And then the other people that I admire in this pandemic are all the people that had to pivot their companies and change on a dime in order to stay financially afloat and keep their employees afloat. And someone I'm thinking of in particular is my hair colorist. I'm just in awe of what she's done. Yes, to my children, I color my hair, but I'm in awe of what she's done to keep her employees employed and to keep her business up and running. She's pivoted so many times, especially in California, where the rules about hairstyling and changed over and over and over and over again. She just continues to stay tough, stay vigilant, and has managed to walk through. And I'm proud of every sort of small business owner who's pivoted, delivered, and come out on the other end.
Thank you. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I have such a long list. We'd take an hour. You know, beginning with essential workers. I mean, there was a joke at the beginning of the pandemic of a guy walking down an aisle of a supermarket with a cart stacked with toilet paper to the top, and some lady comes over and starts screaming at him, "What the hell's wrong with you, you selfish bastard? Don't you understand people need this stuff? You're taking so much for yourself and not giving it to other people. What's wrong?" And he listens to this and listens, and when she takes a breath, he stops and says, "Madam, if you'll get out of the way, I'd like to put this up on the shelf." So these poor people not only had to brave the pandemic, but they had to brave all of our lunacy as we were dealing with it, and the shortages and the fear that came along with it. So the folks who work in the supermarkets, and the folks who work in the shops, and the folks who work in the restaurants, and I wish you were working in the restaurants, and the folks who just took care of all of us and made it a little easier to get through, and went to work every day and braved the pandemic when we didn't know how contagious it was, and do you have to spritz stuff all over everything, or when we didn't know as much. And I give them my blessings. I want to give blessings too. We in the synagogue where I work, and in many synagogues and churches and charities, we reached out to the community and said, "We need your help. We can't do this because we can't do what we normally do to raise funds or to charge people for what we do." And people showed up. I mean, in our synagogue, certainly people were so generous, many without even having to be asked, or well beyond what we asked for. They just said, "You mean something to me. You give me something in my life. I don't want you collapsing in this catastrophe. Let me help you." And those people who were just generous with it, that sacrifice, Mark. They didn't bring me cows, thank God. They brought me checks. And that's what it took. And those people, that mean a lot to me. And then I want to echo what Sherry said. I have dear friends who are doctors and nurses and caregivers and scientists, and what all of them gave. And one in particular friend who's a very, very wonderful giving pulmonologist, and we've been speaking frequently through this, and he's really the tip of the spear on the front line, improvising treatments, improvising ways of dealing with this, improvising procedures and protocols. And at first he was telling me that he'd come home after a 12, 15, 16-hour day and change out of his scrubs in the garage, take a shower before he'd go in and be with his family. And then after a while, he said, "I didn't want to go in with the family. I slept in the garage. I set up a cot in the garage because I was so afraid of spreading this to my kids." To the nurses who held people's hands in an ICU unit and were the last face that somebody saw in this world in this lifetime, and didn't give up and didn't lose it, but stayed with those people and shared the humanity that all of us would so pray to have at a moment like that. The caregivers and the scientists. I have friends who are research scientists. Do you know that these vaccines, I mean, that we're proud of the fact that we created a vaccine in less than a year, that the way that it was done was that pieces of the research were doled out to research groups all across the country. And scientists put away their normal protocols of research, their normal projects, and all of them picked pieces of this up. We haven't yet, no one's yet claimed that I invented the vaccine, because it wasn't invented. It was discovered, it was invented by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of the most talented scientists who just put away everything else that they were doing to figure this thing out, And they did it in less than a year. And for those of us who've had the good fortune and got in line at the right moment to get the vaccine, I got to tell you, it's a simple thing. You know, the nurse comes over, asks you 3 questions about, are you allergic, and sticks you with a needle. And you have to stop and say a bracha. What a remarkable thing. 300-400 years ago, they would have blamed the Jews for poisoning the wells, right? They would have burned witches in the square. And now we know what the virus is. We know how to stop it. And 2 shots, and I can go back and hug my family again. And what a gift that is. So to all of the heroes who made the sacrifices, this Shabbos, Shabbos of Vayakhel Pekudei, we give you our blessings.
Eddie, it's so beautiful. I just add, make sure you know your Amazon deliveries person's name, because we've seen the same guy all year. He takes it and he risks every single day. And so we greet him. Hey, Juan, nice to see you. Goodbye, Juan. Nice to see you. Thank you so much. Make sure you know all the people that are on the front lines for you.
UPS guy, my neighborhood. We stopped him the other day and just said, brother, thank you for what you do. And the look on his face told you something. The look on his face told you. So to all of those people, and to my dear friends, Rabbi Gelman and Rabbi Hirsch, it's our anniversary. It's our year of doing this online. Thank you for sharing Torah with us. And to everyone who's been with us this morning, thank you for sharing Torah. Of course, following Torah study, you're welcome to stay and daven with us. There's a wonderful bar mitzvah from Valley Beth Shalom. This evening at 7 o'clock, Havdalah. Earlier than that, we have Yossi davening. It's at 5, and then 7 o'clock is Havdalah. Tonight, we changed the clocks. Don't forget, this is a crazy halacha. I didn't make this up, right? Milk and meat, that's my problem. Chometz and Pesach, that's my problem. But clock making, that's Congress. So change your clock. It goes ahead an hour. You spring forward, which means that tomorrow morning you're going to wake up blurry and be an hour late. So please make sure to do that. And after that, evening minyan this coming week at 6 o'clock, morning minyan, 8:30 tomorrow morning, 7:30 every other morning of the week. This coming week, lunch and learn, 12:30 on Wednesday. And Wednesday night, I'm doing questions that won't go away, the 3rd episode in our conversation on Jewish theology. And this week, the question is the Torah true? And what makes a story true, and the power of stories to shape us. So join us Wednesday night for that conversation at 7 o'clock on Zoom, Facebook, or YouTube. To Rabbi Gelman, Rabbi Hirsch, I wish you a good Shabbos, and to everyone, stay well and take care.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.